Record on this computer. We are on, Ren.
All
Okay.
right.
I am very excited today because I get to talk to Ren Hurst. I am a huge fan, and thank you so much, Ren, for agreeing to this talk.
Oh, you're so welcome, Fred. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Ren is the author of this wonderful book, Writing on the Power of Others. And I read it last year and devoured it and then contacted Ren. And she's about to finish another great book, and I'm so excited about that. And I actually don't want to introduce Ren. I want her to do it because I think she knows best what she's all about. Ren, would you be so kind as to say what you're about?
Sure. So I'm an author and a speaker and educator these days, but my background was as a professional horsewoman from Texas. I was very successful as a professional horse trainer and a hoof care specialist, and a certain series of interactions with a particular horse using a particular way of thinking and interacting with him ended all of that for me. And I left all of that behind to explore the unconditional nature of love within relationships. And because I come to the wisdom I've gained through animals, I try to teach others how to engage unconditionally with animals in their own homes and in their own lives in order for them to take that true nature of love and start applying it to all of their relationships, but most especially starting with the one they have with themselves. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah, and I find this I don't know where to start because there are so many things I want to ask you, and time is so precious. We had a talk before, and we talked about codependency, and we had different definitions, actually. I thought codependency is when you feel needed and when you think you must save someone. And you said that, and I thought that I was that I wasn't codependent on anyone. And after we talked, I felt that I was codependent on everybody, especially with my dog. Would you explain to us the difference between codependency and love?
Well,
if that's possible.
I'm going to pull something up here that'll make it a little easier. And this is the definition of codependency that I actually use in my new book to help people understand. Let's see here. Give me just a moment. I'll find it, and then I can speak a little bit more to that. Okay, so the website Psychology Today describes codependency as a codependent union is one where both parties are over-dependent on each other. It's a relationship in which the two individuals lean so heavily on one another that both of them are left off balance. And they're desperately trying to get core dependency needs met. Their true identities are distorted, and their development and potential, personally, socially, and professionally, is stifled. The relationship is reciprocal only in that it enables both of them to avoid confronting their own worst fears and self-doubts. As opposed to healthy dependency, defined here as interdependence, the codependent individual in such a relationship needs to be needed if they're to feel okay about themselves. They simply can't feel this way unless they're giving themselves up or sacrificing themselves for their partner. Sadly, without being depended upon, sometimes virtually as a lifeline, they feel alone, inadequate, insecure, and unworthy. So that's the best definition of codependency I've found, and it takes radical courage to look at how the threads of that exist in just about every relationship we have in terms of my well-being is attached to your well-being. That's codependency. Mm-hmm. Love is knowing that my well-being is sovereign internally, and that to love someone is to completely accept and allow them to be who they are in each moment without any expectations for them to have them be different than the way they are. Now, love is unconditional. Relationships, however, are not. Relationships are very much dependent upon agreements, boundaries, consent, things of that nature. And so it can get confusing because I can love somebody without being in relationship to them. And just because I love someone doesn't mean I need to be in relationship to them. So does that answer your question a little bit?
To a great extent, yes. I still have a hard time with this. If I don't feel that the other person needs me, but just because I'm unhappy when they're unhappy, that then makes me codependent.
No. Empathy is not codependency. But if you are suffering, like if you need something to change as a result of their unhappiness, then that would be codependency. But feeling sad for whatever they're going through is not the same thing as wanting to change them.
That's a really difficult fine line for me.
It is a difficult fine line.
Yeah. Because like when you're a mom and you have this idea, which might be wrong, that your child is suffering, or that the suffering is not good for the child. Sometimes we go through a crisis and it's horrible, but it leads to good things. And I don't want to glamorize suffering, not at all, but it can happen, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes a crisis is a turning point. So you see that your child is suffering, and so then you want to help the child. But so where does the love begin and the codependency, the love end and the codependency begin? That's so difficult for me. And I think for others.
The moment that you take your attention off your own suffering to try to engage with the suffering of another is where you step out of love and into codependency. Because when we try to stop someone else's suffering instead of addressing our own, there is a huge disservice to both parties when that occurs. So the only place someone can actually help in the suffering of another is from a place that they aren't suffering already themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes. I feel a little bit thick-headed, but I'm getting there.
No, you shouldn't. I mean, this is the paradigm of love that we live in. This is how everyone engages with what they think is love, is how do I avoid myself at all costs to help everyone else so that I feel worthy in the world? Yeah.
That is challenging. You decided, you went vegan, right? And then you realized that what you were doing with your horses was not anymore in alignment with your new understanding of the world.
Yeah.
And I heard you in another interview say that the science of riding horses is very clear, that it hurts horses. And at the same time, you also warn that science is not always the truth. And I find that very intriguing. And I'm also very busy with thinking about that. What do we do with that? The science, we can always use science to support whatever we want, it seems like,
and that is the key. If you are trying to use science to justify your use of another, then the science at that point is really irrelevant, because exploitation is the issue. And so when it comes to the science and harm of riding horses, it's there. But at the same time, why would anyone need externally derived scientific data to confirm their own beliefs around whether or not something is good or bad for them?
Yeah. I don't know, actually.
Well, and it comes back to love and codependency. Am I looking at myself? Am I looking at within? Am I checking in with my own internal reality of what my values and beliefs are? Or am I letting the external society and conditioning decide what's true for me, what's right, what's wrong, what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing? And that's the only people that desperately need to know the science of the harm, in terms of horses or anything really, are people who are so disconnected from their authentic selves that they need external answers in order just to move forward. Not that those things don't help, they do aid, but it always comes back to you and doing what feels good and right for you.
Yeah, it does. And ultimately, I am responsible for what I do, and I can't quote science in my defense. I feel very strongly about that, because ultimately I have to feel with my heart, I am the granddaughter of a Nazi theologian, and that's a huge issue for me. And I feel that one of the problems with that was this belief in authoritarian figures. Like the Bible says, the state says, somebody else says, science has proven, and then you give up your own connection, or the connection with your heart, and
Totally.
listen to someone else, and that's scary.
Yeah. And that is the nature of what the reality that everyone's living in is. Everyone's dealing with their own domestication, and we perpetuate that through the domestication of others. Mm-hmm. And so I've found, and what my work is really about is rewilding or undomesticating, starting with the beings most directly in our immediate care and control. So our children and our pets. Mm-hmm. You can undomesticate that relationship. It doesn't mean you need to change an animal's biology. It's the only thing that makes an animal domesticated is how we treat it. It's not its genetic code. And so it doesn't mean return all the animals into the wild and let the children run and do whatever they want. It means bring unconditionally loving principles into your every interaction with them so that they are returned to themselves and you are returned to yourself, and codependency ends.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds very easy.
Yeah, right?
Now I know. Thank you.
Good luck with that. Tell me how it goes.
I will.
It's a huge struggle in my life every day. That's why I developed this work, because as far as I've come across, this is the only thing that helps lead us out of this.
Yes. And, we spoke about the difference between your work and Marshall Rosenberg's, which I adored until I saw yours. And I still think it's an extremely great beginning.
I have a lot of respect for it as well.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Could you explain the difference between your approach and Marshall's? What the missing link is?
I think the only missing link is in order to actually embody Marshall's work, it starts mm-hmm. before words, before language. So mm-hmm. to try to start with the external, which is the languaging, the communication, mm-hmm. That doesn't work. You can say the right words, and the feeling behind them is always going to be received first. And mm-hmm. so if you start on the inside and make sure you're actually coming from that place, mm-hmm. you actually don't need to be taught how to speak differently, because if you make sure you're coming from that place from the inside out, your words will be reflective of that inner loving, kind energy and that nonviolent communication style. But a lot of people are bypassing that and just choosing nonviolent sounding words. And that's not exactly how it works. And I don't think he intended for it to happen that way for people that weren't embodying what he was speaking to.
How can you teach embodiment?
That is a good question.
Because, I think, sometimes when we say something like devoutly or really let it sink in, it can influence us. And words certainly shape our perception and thus our actions and thus what happens to us. But, so if you say this and feel it, it can mm-hmm. help you to embody it. And at the same time, if you really feel it, it doesn't matter which words you use because something will happen. But how do you explain that to someone? Is it just, how do you lead someone to this?
That's codependency, trying to lead someone to something you haven't fully embodied yourself.
Good one.
So that doesn't mean that we should stop teaching, because I'm not fully embodied in my own work. I'm more embodied in it than anyone else because it's my work, but I have to try every day. I struggle every day. I have relationship issues like anyone else. I just have an incredible set of wisdom and tools to always guide me back to what's true. Mm-hmm. And so whenever there is this feeling of I need to help this person be something more than what they are, mm-hmm. that is codependency, and it's reflective of a lack of full acceptance of the self. Mm-hmm. So when we fully accept who we are, we can still guide people, we can still teach people, we can still offer so many things, but the energy of suffering and attachment, we are released from that because there's no longer an expectation to fix or help.
Yes.
And how do you teach embodiment is you get people, you show people in various ways of how to get back in touch with what is going on inside their body through somatic practice, there's all sorts of embodiment techniques where it's basically embodied wisdom or embodied inquiry. I've just recently learned is a field that is being more and more explored these days. And so if you're not even in tune with what your body is feeling on a sensation level, when you're acting or speaking or behaving in certain ways, then that's where you start, is how does this make me feel when I do this? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel calm? And to me, that anxiety or calmness is the difference between love and fear.
Wow. Yeah. So it always starts with the self, as always. And when you work with people, do you do this? Do you do work like that where you let them feel?
Yeah, and we do partnered exercises so they get a chance to feel, and you can feel what someone else is feeling when you're quiet long enough to take it in. And so working with animals is an even better way to do this, because you're not coming up against another ego. You're not having to deal with language that often does get in the way. I love language, but it's supposed to be a tool, not something we rely upon. So there is a deeper language that is well before words that we have access to at all times, and it's a wiser language, in my opinion, and it gives us access to conversations beyond just human to human, or even country to country. There's even those of us that speak the same English or the same whatever language, we misinterpret one another all day long based on our own perspective and filters. So that's just a perfect example of how language is not the answer. The answer is well below that, in the connectedness of our bodies and how we feel one another.
That is true. And because I'm a language teacher, this is sometimes frustrating.
Well, it's all language. I mean, spoken language is just words. It's all communication.
Yeah, sometimes, but it's when as a language teacher, I'm often focused on ego, subject, verb, object, right? That's very intellectual. But ultimately, I do try to teach a way that, how does this particular structure make you feel? How does it make you see the world? And how does it connect you with yourself or not?
That's fantastic.
At the same time, I feel, people always say, well, there's this pre-verbal or non-verbal realm, but sometimes it's when I want to talk about it to you, I need language, and it's this bridge between whatever there is, and the language is difficult. I don't know how to. I don't know how you talk, how you communicate, how you teach communication without language.
Oh no, and I'm not suggesting that you do. Nothing I'm saying is removing language from the equation. It's just embodied language
and adding another level.
It's starting where it actually starts from. Because the purpose of language, I mean, what are we communicating if we're not able to be in touch with our feelings or what really matters? So how the difficulty comes from when we stop the incessant mind stuff. When language isn't running us inside of our heads, we're left with the feelings that we've been carrying our entire lives. And that takes some processing. The older you are and the more you're carrying, the more you have to process. And until that is both faced, dealt with, and felt through the body, then we use whatever we can, including language and thinking, to avoid it because it's uncomfortable.
Yes. And it's easy to slip into that.
Totally. In every way imaginable.
Yeah. Feelings, like Marshall Rosenberg talks about that, and you talk about it too, that love is not a feeling.
No.
And do you want to talk about that a little bit? People
Sure.
often talk about, there's, in a way, we have sensations and feelings. And is there a difference between a feeling and an emotion? It depends on how you define it, right?
A little bit, and I don't have clear words on how to differentiate the two of those. I'm thinking about that.
So sensation is easy. I mean, I can feel, feel is sometimes used for sensation.
That's true, yeah.
And sometimes it's used for emotion, and sometimes it's used for thinking. Sometimes people say, I feel cold. That's a sensation.
Yeah, right.
Then they say, I feel angry. That's actually a mixture between sensation and emotion, isn't it? A little bit? Somehow?
I don't know. I would call that an emotion. So I guess it depends on how you're using the word feel and feeling.
And then if I say, I feel you're wrong, then I'm actually using it in the sense of thinking.
And see, if somebody says, I feel that you're wrong, that's just a misuse of the word, I think.
I agree, but it's done a lot.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that is, and another thing that work like Marshall Rosenberg's does not touch on, is something is being felt there. Something is being felt, but we have never been taught how to communicate what we are feeling from another, because not everything I feel is mine. That's impossible. We're all connected. So sometimes I can feel something that is going on in you, but that is not something that we are ever taught in how to accurately communicate.
That is so true. And it's actually a process of learning what is my sensation or feeling here, and what am I absorbing from the outside world. I sometimes cannot separate the two.
And internal feelings are our own business. And so even if I could accurately interpret what you are feeling, that's really out of my boundaries. So inquiry and asking questions is the most appropriate way to access that, not for me to tell you what you're feeling.
I agree, because but it's mysterious and difficult. Sometimes you can. I think that when I pet my dog and he has a sore hip, I can sometimes physically actually feel his pain.
Yeah, I'm sure.
His electric shocks. Like, I can't quite describe what's happened, but something like ripples through my body. That's a sensation then, right? And when I then am sad about that, that's a feeling.
Yeah. I honestly, I'd have to really put a lot of thought into what the difference between feelings and emotions are, but I use them interchangeably.
Yeah, but maybe I'm splitting hairs, but I find it interesting to think about, sensations and whatever feelings or emotions,
right?
And then the thoughts we have, and I find it tricky. We have a sensation and it brings up a feeling. We have a thought and it brings up a feeling, and sometimes, and I was getting on the slippery slope because you and Marshall Rosenberg say that love is not a feeling, but sometimes when I see my dog and I hug him, I get this warm gush of something. That's it.
Oh yeah, affection, admiration. Yeah. There's all sorts of words for it, but
and
love
I would have said it.
way too big.
I would have said that's love, but so that's affection.
Well, and here's the thing: love can't be taken away. So if you can have that ooey gooey feeling for your dog one minute and then be pissed off at him the next minute if he tears up the rug, that is not love. That's affection in one minute and anger in another. Love is all encompassing, and it is constant. It is a constant acceptance and allowing of another individual. So how I define love is, it is a container for all things that cannot be defined by any lesser part of itself. That doesn't mean that it doesn't include those lesser parts of itself, but it cannot be defined by any lesser part of itself. And to me, the closest synonyms to love are presence. And for me, wild. That's what wild means.
Wow. That's interesting. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And it needs to be said, because that's quite different from what we think it is.
It is. Even the people using terms like rewilding and undomesticating, especially, I've seen it so much since I started using the term also. It means something different for me than what I've seen it used by other people. my understanding of the wild is different than a lot of people's understanding of the wild. I don't think that wild means go back to primitive ways. I mean, I think wild means to be free of someone else's control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But with everything, you know, I always tell my students in grammar, definitions aren't true or right, true or false, or right or wrong. It's a definition is a tool, and we use it in order to try to grasp a little bit of what we're experiencing.
And we made them up. So
when we make them up, and we can redefine them. You know, when
totally.
you look at the, you know, I love Webster's dictionary, but if you look at the definition of animal in Webster's dictionary, you know, I mean, when I look at it, I want to throw up, because, you know, there is an animal that's a thing and that's to be used by us and all of that. I mean, I don't have good memory, so I cannot quote the definition to you. But, you know, and just think, hello, you guys, you need to redefine this a little bit. And then you realize, you know, many people think the dictionary is like the Bible.
Yeah.
And the definition is the truth. And so if someone defines something as whatever, you know, a subject or an object in grammar, or an animal in another setting, then that's true, you know. And so whenever we have a discussion, I tell them we need to say, okay, what are the tools we're using and how are we using them? And so using love as an emotion is not wrong, but it's helpful to look at what do we really mean, and we are often not quite clear about it.
Yeah, and we use the word love so flippantly in so many situations that's why I don't like using it in situations that aren't big enough to honor what it really is. Because you can say, I love a cheeseburger. I mean,
I hope not.
but people do all the time. They say things like that. And what does that mean?
I'm guilty too. I mean, I like eating chocolate, and I will tell people that I love chocolate.
Right. And you might love chocolate, but it's just, it's a lazy way to express the fullness of what our experience is in that moment. And I've only come across one absolute truth in my entire life, and it is love, in the way that love is ineffable to a degree. Love is a state of being. It is not an emotion, a feeling, a thought. It's a way of allowing, where you really aren't trying to exert control, which is what my 13 principles of my work are about. Mm-hmm. It's a system of 13 checks and balances to check yourself with, am I coming from love or something else?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to put some links in the description box where people can look at interviews and then learn more about you, because we can't talk about everything. But would you mind sharing a little bit what the book is about, even though you've shared it before?
Yeah, sure.
In context, it's good now, because you mentioned the 13 principles.
Yeah, well, the first book, Writing on the Power of Others, is my journey into coming into this state of awareness, and where that wisdom like originated, and my whole backstory, and my credibility, to say, to a degree. And the new book is Animal Kin, Restoring Connection to Wild Wisdom. And it is how to allow your relationship with animals to move you into an unconditional state of love with others. And it takes what I allude to in the first book, and what that book ends with, and teaches you the how-to of how do I achieve this for myself? How do I get this in my own relationships? And I give you the framework of how to guide yourself down that path, because it's not black and white and there aren't right and wrong answers. There's a system of checks and balances. Everyone is kind of up to them. It's up to everyone to have their own experiences and do their own self-work, because everyone's carrying their own unique background and experiences. And all I can do is help guide you away from anything that is avoidance behavior or distraction from actually stepping into the fullness of what love is. So the new book is teaching you what the 13 principles are, taking you into the depths of them, and then also taking you along my own personal journey in applying this work with my dog, Denali.
Yeah, cool. Wow. And are you going to offer workshops along with that book later on?
Yeah, I've already started doing that, and that's been really wonderful. I'm really limited on how much I can be away and teach, because unfortunately, coming to these conclusions cost me everything. And I'm currently homeless to a degree. I'm camping full time to make sure that I can provide for my animals the way that I want to. And I have a tremendous amount of horses from my old life. So I'm living out in the wilderness right now and trying to get a little bit of electricity set up. I have this wonderful office that's donated to my foundation every month. And so once I'm able to bring in a little bit more sustainable income through teaching this work and whatever other means I have access to, then I'll be a lot more available to teach. So for that reason, I'm probably going to develop an online course in January, which will hopefully lead to me being able to travel more.
This might actually be a good time to remind the audience that they can contribute to the production of the book, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to put this in the description box so people can go on Kickstarter still, right? And then donate via PayPal.
Totally. So I did a Kickstarter recently to cover the bills and help me get some electricity so that I could finish the new book, because it's very hard to devote a lot of time to that when there's so many other things that need to be done, like how do we survive? Yes. And the Kickstarter was successful and it was fully funded, but as much as we can bring in is what we really need. And so people can donate to me directly now through PayPal and receive the same rewards that were offered on Kickstarter. So this is how you can get a copy of the book before everyone else.
That is so cool. So definitely, whoever is watching this, please support Ren.
Thank you.
And then we could actually also organize group sessions through Zoom internationally, right? So we could actually work like this with this platform.
Totally. And I would love to do that. The only limitation there at the moment is that I don't have a lot of access to the office and things of that nature until I get a little bit more stable at home.
So people listening to this who get excited about this can actually set this up on their own or with me. So
cool. What I do offer right now is I do offer one-on-one coaching currently.
Yes, I know you do. And I had a session with you and I loved it.
I'm so glad.
Yes, thank you so much. I have a lot of homework from that. I'm not done, I'm afraid.
I'm not either, so.
Do we still have time for another question?
Sure.
I hope I'm not confusing you or the listener, because it's difficult for me to keep this coherent thought going, because there are so many different things that are all connected.
Yeah.
And one thing that I often struggle with, and I think lots of people do, is, when we often say we're on this journey of self-actualization and self-development, and especially for us who turned vegan, a lot of us, or most of us, feel that, wow, before we woke up, we were wrong, and now we've got it right, or at least that part right. I don't ever think that I'm right, but I feel better now that I'm vegan. And so I have a lot of judgment about myself, and I always work, I always think, well, I didn't know better, and now I know better, now I do better. And I try not to judge other people who don't want to hear the message. But still, where do you go with, where do we go with we're good enough, and still we want to change and grow? Do you have any exciting tips for us?
Possibly. The problem is that that's each individual's own responsibility to decide what their spirituality consists of. So for me personally, I deeply, deeply believe that this one physical experience is not all that we are, all that is. I very much feel like I am a spiritual being, deeply connected to all things and all life, having a human experience. So I also believe that's true for every individual on this earth, including animals. And so even though there is sadness that comes from bearing witness to suffering and death and things of that nature, if we can broaden our perspective and remember that we are tiny specks on a spinning ball in an infinite universe, those bits of suffering that we see on a daily basis are pretty insignificant in the greater scheme of things. And that is not to excuse that behavior or to ask it to continue, but that's not my business. What is my business is, who am I? What example am I setting? What am I embodying? And I truly believe that if more people would focus on their internal example instead of their external example, this world would change so fast we wouldn't even know what to do with ourselves. if you believe that we are all deeply connected,
Mm-hmm.
then it only takes a few dedicated individuals to embody fully what it is to be love before there would have to be a systematic change across this planet that would change the external environment that we're seeing on a daily basis. But as long as we are distracting ourselves through codependency by trying to change everyone else and fix everyone else, it's just a head game. It takes too long to create external change
Mm-hmm.
long term by focusing externally. Internally is what is most effective. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're religious or what you believe, but Jesus Christ did not affect people for centuries because of what he said. He affected them because of who he was. And I'm not Christian, and I don't have a religious belief system, but I do have a great amount of respect for anyone who can embody their teaching so much to have that kind of effect on the planet. And I don't think anything he taught is what has been misconstrued and shifted since then. I think what he taught and embodied was unconditional love.
Mm-hmm. And he was probably vegan too.
And he got killed for talking about it. So, I mean, what chance in hell do we have?
It's oh, let's not go there.
No, it's a joke. But I mean, it is, you know, I don't know if he was vegan then or not, but I am certain that he would be vegan today. Because there's just no way around not being vegan if you're being honest these days.
For me, there isn't, and I'm just appalled that I didn't get it earlier, because I know when I was 5, I saw a rabbit being killed, and I was devastated.
Yeah.
And I saw a baby calf being taken away from its mom, and I was devastated. I just didn't connect the dots, and my mom said, well, that's very sad, but that's how the world goes. And I didn't eat the rabbit, but I didn't wake up.
Yeah. Well, and the only comforting I can offer in those situations is that death is not what we make it out to be. It's not this bad thing. We've all suffered to the depths of what suffering offers. Anyone on this earth that has ever felt so bad that they wished their life would end, which is most people, I would wage to say, has experienced the same suffering that we witness in animals. So it's not like death after suffering is the worst thing ever. It's a release, and depending on what your belief system is, then life goes on, and being released from this physical form is not the scariest thing that we can come up with. Suffering day to day when we have life to be living is way worse than the end of life, if you perceive it that way.
Yeah, you know, I personally don't. I don't have a conviction, and I have a feeling that this is not all, but I'm actually not so worried about it. I'm trying to live my life in a meaningful way, and I want to contribute, and I'll just stand back and watch. You know, the things I do in daily life don't change because of a belief of what happens after this form is gone.
Right.
You know, I'm not doing something to be saved, because in the after I try to be a decent human being. I'm trying not to be an asshole. You know? And I would try that regardless. And so it doesn't, that part is not, it somehow leaves me, it doesn't bother me somehow. I don't need to know that mystery. I just don't. But when I see suffering, it makes me angry and sad.
Yeah. And my interpretation of that is that, I mean, it is natural to feel whatever you feel in the face of suffering, but the worse we feel is usually more indicative of the suffering that is still inside of us that has not been acknowledged, has not been processed, and has not been dealt with. Because I will say, the person I am today, I can bear witness to enormous suffering these days when I know in my past that would not have been true. I can face death head on. I can see horrible things happening. I know when to take action and when not to, and I can do it from a calm state. And grace has entered in a way that I never had access to before because I have dealt with so much of my inner trauma. And that, I think, is what is being asked of those of us trying to make a positive difference in the world. That is what embodiment is. Because if we can't bear witness to the suffering of the world, how in the world do we expect to change it?
That is so interesting. That so many people say, don't show me that. Don't show me those things, because then I can't eat that anymore, or that makes me sad. And I must say, I mean, I suffered through this, and I just forced myself to watch it, and I found it almost impossible. But this is interesting that you say that you can now notice the difference between when you need to step in and when you don't.
Yeah.
And that happens.
We need to think about something else too. A lot of times in our efforts to save animals, we're not considering the humans we're trying to change. And trying to change somebody is not a loving act anyway. But when somebody can't bear witness to suffering, they are holding a lot of their own internal suffering. We have no idea what people have been through. So to re-traumatize somebody purposefully is not necessarily the kindest or most loving act. There are different ways to go about influencing positive change in the world, and it's through embodied example. If you are the kind of person that someone feels 100% safe with, and if you inspire someone to admire and respect the example you set, that is far more influential on a long-term change than trying to tell them they're wrong or show them the truth of something. Everybody that eats animals knows on some level that they're eating an animal. That's why they avoid it. You don't have to keep harping on that to them. What you need to do is love them and set an example. And the truth is, if there were more happy vegans that were embodying love, the world would be vegan a lot faster.
Yeah, but you know what? I actually can attest.
I
can attest to that. I when I went vegan, my kids were teenagers, and usually, it went the wrong way. Usually, those weird moms are supposed to be meat eaters, and the cool kids are supposed to become vegan. But I turned vegan.
Yeah.
I thought that I had lost it, and I didn't force them. I just did my thing, and they turned vegan 4 and 5 years after me.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean that I can attest to that. What they look at me, and I've never tried to tell them what to do. Yeah. I've tried to protect them and love them, but they've never done what I said. They've done what I do.
And strong people won't. That's the thing, is we can convince a lot of followers to become vegan through our words and pushy actions. But what you really want is to inspire leaders to make these change, people who have influence on others. And I've emerged as this voice for veganism really rapidly in the last 2 years, which is bizarre to me because I come from the complete opposite side. And I actually don't agree or want to hold space with a lot of people who label themselves as vegan activists for this very reason. I come from the opposite side of this. I have felt the trueness of how authenticity and loving kindness is more important than what we do on the outside. And for instance, yesterday I had to deal with a former vet tech over the death of an animal. And we got to talking, and she asked what I did. And she was one of the most wonderful people I've ever gotten to interact with in terms of how genuine she was. And the work she does is basically, she's the one you call when a large animal dies and the body has to be disposed of in a compassionate, kind way. And so when people are desperate and sad, this is the woman they call, and she comes with this beautiful rig and equipment and takes care of it for them in a way that is deeply kind and loving and compassionate. And I knew as soon as she pulled up that this is not a vegan, but this is somebody who really understands people and the love that people need to feel in these situations. So we got to talking. And she asked me why I was vegan, and I told her why I was. And she said all the typical things non-vegans say when they're deeply confronted, even though we were having a very loving, kind conversation. She was like, well, I raise my animals very lovingly, and I love them until we kill them, and I love the way they taste. And she said all the things that trigger most vegans. And I was just like, yeah, I totally understand that. I used to be in that place, and then I started loving myself. And when I started loving myself, every part of me that was harming others dropped away. I didn't want to harm others, no matter how good it felt for me. And I know that she walked away from that conversation having taken in everything that I said, because she felt safe to be who she was and express how she felt and have her own belief system. She hugged me, walked away, and she's probably thinking about it now. And that's how we affect change. It's not by condemning someone for doing, of course, what we were conditioned and told to do. I mean, there's nothing to feel guilty about because you had no control of those things as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So as we come to our own sovereignty as adults and can make our own decisions, we do the best we can as quickly as we can. And if there were more embodied examples of love walking around, we'd come to these conclusions a lot sooner. So instead of blaming anyone else that could have led us to these conclusions sooner, it's really up to each of us to become the most authentic examples of what it is to be love. Because what is the point of veganism without love?
That is true. Yeah, and I sometimes feel I'm rougher on myself than I'm on my fellow Earthlings.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't judge. I mean, I wouldn't judge someone else as harshly for having eaten meat as I judge myself. Actually.
Well, I think we're all dealing with that to a degree. So.
Yeah. I mean, I know. I mean, in a way, guilt doesn't enter into it. You didn't know. I mean, you didn't do it on purpose, and I don't blame anyone else. I blamed myself. I just thought I could have known. In a way, I knew when I was 5. I was smarter when I was 5 than I am now.
Kind of. And I can say something to that hopefully will make you feel better. There's intellectual knowing,
mm-hmm.
and then there's fully embodied knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as young children, it's very hard to have both because you're under the constant influence of those with more power over
mm-hmm.
you, and you're essentially in someone else's control.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing to feel guilty about in those states because you're innocent, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we can start making our decisions for ourselves, it doesn't mean that we become less innocent. It's just that's the first time we even have the opportunity to step back into the empowerment of our own decision making. And depending on how deeply conditioned we've been between the first part and the next part, that's how many layers have to be uncovered. So we throw around the saying, once we know, we do better.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing is far more than intellectual knowing. Knowing has to be felt. And a lot of people know things conceptually without knowing them internally. And it takes all of it for someone to actually make change.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that very reason, a lot of activism is unsuccessful, even if it looks successful on the surface, because we can drill the information into people.
Yeah.
But if they don't have the experiential learning of connection, they'll never make the change, at least not long term. Or if they do make the external change, they'll redirect that bad behavior or that negative energy into some other behavior or activity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really amazing. I think that your work is so important for teachers and parents, in addition to all people like me who are guardians of dogs and pets. Because, as a teacher, you are in this incredible power position over children.
Yeah.
And schools, at least here in Germany, schools and universities are really patriarchal dominance structures still.
It's the same here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like authoritarianism, and it's really violent in some ways. And no surprise, I mean, German students, both high school students and college students, are extremely stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two things that are happening. I mean, one thing is that intellectualism is pushed as being such a great thing. So like people feel not worthy if they haven't studied, which, is so ridiculous. They simply need to pay them better.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that's a big story, but then somehow, you get this stamp of approval from this patriarchal structure, and then you're good to go,
Yeah.
But in order to get this stamp, they really, really dominate you and exploit you, and children are getting sick. I see so many stressed children.
Yeah, and the thing is what nature gave you as the most technologically advanced information system, your body, your emotions,
Mm-hmm.
you're at war with those constantly in systems such as that, where you're just being domesticated for
Mm-hmm.
someone else's purposes. And so your body is screaming
Yes.
to be in alignment with its truth and its
Mm-hmm.
ultimate feelings, while the system that you're in is taking away your freedom all
Yeah.
day, every day.
And I spoke to a teacher today and she says, I don't know, I might be going insane. And she mentioned just a few situations. I said, no, you're not going insane. You're dealing with an insane situation. And you're surprisingly sane considering.
Yeah.
And so you see people getting sick, teachers, getting sick and students getting sick, but they seem to often at war. People think, oh, the bad teacher, and teachers think, oh, the lazy students. And so I don't think that we will fix the system. I think we need, as you said, to fix ourselves and then build something up. And the internet now permits that.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hoping is that, your class, your online class, will actually be accessed by teachers so that they will do the work and then carry something else into the society.
And there may be more. I mean, I'm sure there's more out there. I'm focused on my own life just because of how demanding it is right now.
Yeah.
But I just recently read a little about a school that's opening in New York City
Mm-hmm.
by a woman who they've removed all forms of structure. And the school is really based around play and encouragement and passion and knowing your own truth and teaching the kids how to think for themselves and follow what makes them feel inspired, and boundaries and consent are in place and things like that. And I think that would just be an incredible thing to watch and see how that model develops.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, they have some alternative type schools in Germany now. I mean, there are these model schools where they experiment. I haven't seen them really close up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very, very hard to get out of this thinking. I mean, I've read a lot. I've read a lot about it, and I'm trying to learn to embody it. But I have a long way to go, and I feel, I see myself relapsing all the time.
Well, even I do, knowing
Mm-hmm.
what I know. I mean, I've
Yeah.
only been exploring this for 5 years, and it was a real rude awakening because I learned this from being basically alone in the desert with an undomesticated herd of horses for 2 years. And then when I reintegrated into society, it was like, oh my God, I just thought that I had like woken up. Because the more I was around the insanity that is humanity,
Yeah.
the more I got pulled into my own habits and behavior. And it's hard to stand in the truth of your deepest knowing when you're surrounded by anything but that. So it takes enormous discipline and practice and coming back to the body and removing yourself from situations that don't serve your highest good or your highest purposes.
Yeah, that's why it's really good to have conversations like this one and to have schools.
Yeah.
So I'll put the information in the description box, and I hope that we'll be talking again if you agree to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And well, good. Should we leave it at that for today?
That's great for me if it is for you.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on for hours, but probably it's better if I stop the recording. So I'll stop the recording in a minute. But first, let me say thank you so much. This was really, really special. Thank you.
Thank you, Frid. I really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you.